Cheers and welcome my friends, I'm Horath and we are going to be talking about the changes coming to Stellaris in the 1.9 patch. There have been two dev diaries, Dev Diary 91 and Dev Diary 92, which I'm going to link in the description. And I've had a lot of people asking me, Horath, what is your opinion? And instead of answering that question over and over again, I thought I'd just make a video and tell you guys what I think. So, changes are going to come to Starbases and expansion, and even bigger changes are coming to FTL, faster than light travel in the game. Now, I thought we're going to do this in a certain way, so I'm just going to go quickly over the changes, first for Starbases and expansion, then for FTL. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think could be negative and what I think could be or will be positive about these changes. Sound good? Well, then let's start with the Starbases. So we're going to have a different expansion system that is tied into the Starbases. So we're going to have new borders. You might have already seen that picture where the borders expand from just a single system around it, instead of you having a certain radius that encompasses multiple systems. And the way that works is you have to basically manually expand into each system by using influence and by building a very basic outpost that won't cost any maintenance. But that sort of brings that system under your control, which also seems to be tied into a different warfare and war score system then. And so this way you sort of core each system, and you have to think about which system you take under your control and which ones you leave out. The further they are away, the more influence they cost. And if you sort of expand organically just by going for adjacent systems, then it's cheaper for you to do that than if you go for faraway systems or if you're trying to rush to certain strategic locations, which is, I think, a very good idea so far, but we're going to get into positive, negative later. The Starbases come into play when you want to do when you want to build up these systems. And I have a picture that Martin Unwood tweeted a while ago that you should see now. So what you can see is I have marked two things. On the top, you can see one of three and a starport symbol next to it. So apparently starports are going to be gone completely. Apart from a select few. You can upgrade these starports in 5 levels, I think, from the very basic thing that is only giving you control of that system to a super built-up Citadel starbase with multiple defense stations and even multiple shipyards where you can build lots of ships at the same time simultaneously. There are a lot of different modules that you can put on the spaceports and different buildings. And so if you these sort of evolve out of the buildings that give you control over a certain system, and controlling that starbase also transfers control of the system. This is a really big change. The other change that I wanted to highlight in this picture is that you can see we have the first fleet in here, and it says 3 of 10, which I think means that days of the doom stack are gone. If we have limitations on how many ships can be in a fleet, that makes warfare a lot more strategic. I really like that change. But yeah, those are sort of the basic things. Planets will no longer have starports, but will naturally be able to just build civilian ships, construction ships, colony ships, and science ships. And so there is something negative to this. Negative points: the coring of every single system could potentially end up being a bit micromanagey. I'm not sure how easy it's going to be to select each system. Currently, you build an outpost and you get a bunch of systems around it. And that's that. If you have to build them in every single system that you want to expand to, I'm not sure how comfortable that's going to be. Stellaris is already in in some points a very micromanagement heavy game. Just think about army attachments. Just think about building up planets. We'll see how they implement that, and then I can continue nagging from that point onward. But it's not going to be more micromanagey, and hopefully we actually get interesting decisions into what system we should expand. I hope it's not always a no-brainer. Interesting thing is that they say in the dev diary that we're no longer going to have systems that have nothing in them, which seems to be a good idea. They say it's not very rewarding in playtests to just spend influence for a system that has nothing. So I guess we're going to have a richer universe, which is going to be very interesting. You can see if you have a look at these stations, they are really powerful. Like you're gonna see a picture now where you see a station that has 61,000 fleet power, and according to Martin, the game director, Wiz, or the chief designer, this is not the most powerful station. So we're finally going to have defensible stations that can really fight back even against endgame fleets. That's what I'm hoping for. It still looks like we're going to have limits on how many of these orbital stations we can build, which I'm not a fan of. In Distant Worlds, for example, you just have you have no size limit for orbital stations, just because you can basically stack them on there with wild abandon, as long as you can afford it. I mean, Stellaris does things a little bit differently than Distant Worlds, but for ships, you sort of have a natural stop point for making ships bigger, because you have to think the whole propulsion system, slowing ships down. If you make the ship too huge, you need huge drives, and then that sort of becomes prohibitive at some point. But for stations, not so much. Right, let's talk about the positive stuff that I see from these changes. So what I really like is that we have specialization options now. That's going to give the game a lot more depth. I would like to see these changes for ship designs too. But yeah, you can have multiple shipyards on a system. You can have lots of defense stations. You can apparently build these guys out for trading with the modules and the buildings. You can also go for increasing your fleet size with these. I really like what they're doing with that. And potentially it could even end up being less micromanagement than the current system, where you have to build and upgrade a starport in every single system that you own if you really want to go to the maximum fleet capacity. I sort of feel that pressure in the multiplayer game that I'm currently taking part of, Star Trek New Horizons Clash of the Titans multiplayer game, where I'm playing the War. I have 50 planets. Managing all those, I mean, it's also a problem because the sector AI is brain dead, but just upgrading those spaceports and putting all the modules on there that I want is very micro intensive. So if we can do that with just 3 or 4 or 5 star bases, that's much nicer, and we will be able to build whole fleets maybe on a completely specialized shipyard starport. That could be very interesting. The thing is, meaningful defenses is something that the game needed very, very much. And this should also help the AI. Like, the AI doesn't have to defend everything anymore. They're going to have a script that I guess tells them build up to your limit of star bases. And then they know what to defend. I have a feeling that in the current version of the game, the AI really doesn't know which starports it should defend or which planets. Which are absolutely critical. Like, you gotta defend your home system. You've gotta defend your home system, otherwise you're hosed, because you're very likely to have your highest level spaceport in there. And the AI really isn't doing any sort of prioritizing on that. They just, you took my home system. I'm gonna bombard this completely negligible planet in your space. So hopefully this is gonna improve the AI. Rebuilding fleets will also be less tedious. Like, if you lose a fleet, you just go to your shipyard, with all those shipyards, to your starbase with all those additional shipyards on there, and just crank out another fleet without having to click through dozens and dozens of starbases to reproduce a fleet very quickly. So potentially, this is going to reduce micromanagement a lot. Now, this is just a base for the changes to the FTL system. I'm going to come to that right now. That's going to be a little bit of a bigger thing, but it's we need the changes to expansion and starbases before we can talk about FTL, just because they're sort of going to go together. So the really big change in Dev Diary 92 has been that we're going to have a complete rework of the FTL system. I mean, if you've been playing Stellaris for a while, then you've seen this coming. So currently we have in the game warp drives, hyperlanes, and wormholes. And with 1.9, we're going to see hyperlanes being the default FTL drive for various reasons, mainly because of making it easier for the AI, sort of development reasons. They've been saying in past interviews that the multitude of FTL drives that they have is really hampering the game development and the game design. So it sounds bad. It's definitely something that I was sad about when I heard of it, because I love the warp drive just because of Star Trek. So what we're going to have is warp drives between systems, or hyperlanes between systems, but apparently we're going to have a slider that allows you to increase the amount of hyperlanes between systems to the point where you max out the slider. You're just going to have connections between all the systems, and then you basically have your warp drive back. This is for the early game. Sort of in the mid game, you're gonna find two things of the wormhole type. You're gonna find natural wormholes. At first, if you encounter these, you won't be able to travel through, but as soon as you get the tech, you can sort of stabilize those wormholes and then travel through them. And the other wormholey thing that you get is are gateways. So you can find these and repair them after you get the necessary tech. And those connect just two at the beginning. But you will be able to build them yourself, and they provide a method of instant travel. So you can build your own network of gateways that connect your whole empire. And the nice thing about the gateways apparently is that you can control who goes through if they are in your zone of control. Don't think you can actually control the natural wormholes, but they can still be very interesting. Giving you new regions of space. And then jump drive isn't gone. It seems like they're going to keep it for the end game, where you have jump drive that you sort of use as a special ability, where you travel between or outside the hyperlane system, but you have to line it up, spin it up the drive, then jump to the other system, and then you're going to have a wind down phase where your fleet is vulnerable while they sort of recover from doing the jump. That's pretty nice. I'm glad that that's still in there as an end game thing, and I think it's a good idea that you have sort of a progression from the hyperlane thing, where the warp drive allows you to do different things strategically. That's very interesting. But let's talk about the negatives. I think you've seen the system. One important change that you should know about is that we're gonna have to fly to the correct exit of a star system. So if you want to travel to, you're going to see that picture over here. If you want to move to Alpha Centauri, you've got to get to that green arrow to actually leave the system at the correct spot to enter that hyperlane, which I think is very good for just defensive gameplay. Like, because you know how fleets have to move if they want to reach certain points. Currently, the system is a little bit weird to read, because you have to find out what kind of drives are they using, and then what kind of logic they are doing, kind of logic they are following. So I think this is going to improve massively, and I guess they have to go through the center of the system. So what are the negatives about this? Well, species are going to vary less. That's definitely a negative point. They're going to become a little bit more bland, because everyone is just going to use the hyperlanes. No longer are you going to have those weird wormhole aliens just using the wormholes and traveling in a totally different way through space than you will. That's sad, and I think that's the biggest negative point, because one of the real strengths of Stellaris is having all those diverse, different races where you can tell your own stories. Warp Drive is also cool just because of Star Trek. I mean, it's iconic in a way. I'm glad that they're not throwing it out completely. It's a very radical shift from the game that was initially sold. But, I mean, you can always say, well, the initial game has been supported for a very long time, and if you just want to stay with the game that you bought, then you can just stay on one of the 1.8 betas. I think they're going to allow you to do that for basically indefinitely. I think they have to. At the first glance, this also seems to take away strategic depth and options, because what kind of FTL drive you take in the beginning was definitely a choice that you had to think about. I almost never chose hyperlanes because I didn't want to be restricted in one direction or another, because someone with warp drives can actually run circles around someone with hyperlanes. So strategically, that was an important choice. And I'm also a bit unhappy about this change, because most Space 4Xs actually have the hyperlanes, and I was actually really happy that Stellaris didn't. The only other big Space 4X that doesn't really have hyperlanes, or didn't have that, is Distant Worlds, where you also have just warp drives in a completely zoomable galaxy. But there are a lot of positive aspects to this. It's definitely going to be very, very good for the AI, because you can optimize the AI way easier now. Used to be that playing Hyperlanes map only games boosted the AI a lot. Should also sort of reduce the resources that the game needs, because apparently the wormhole calculations are real resource hogs. It's kind of good. If we can get rid of that late game slowdown that Stellaris has, I mean, within the bounds of being a 32-bit program, then that would be really nice. But the main thing about this, and the reason why it sort of goes hand in hand with the changes to expansion and Starfolds, is that it gives you much more strategic warfare options. Like, you're gonna have real choke points. You can play defensively now, or at least that's what I'm hoping. Like, we're gonna have those big, strong space stations that are leveled up, like 60,000 fleet power. We saw in the screenshot, maybe we can even get 200, 300, maybe even 1 million. Like, just thinking out loud here. And apparently you are not able to get around those star bases. Like, if you're in a system, you only have the option to retreat or to take out the starbase. So you can't just go in there and then jump to the next system. You gotta fight the defensive station, or you gotta retreat. I'm not sure how that works logically. I mean, okay, I guess you travel through the system to enter a different hyperlane. It's always weird to think about something stationary forcing something mobile into a fight. That's the reason why cavalry was such a great idea over all of history, because the horseman can always decide when the attack happens, compared to an infantryman who just has to wait the attack. So how those stations are going to force fleets into battle and to stay in there, I guess we just got to go with some sort of magical solution where we have FTL inhibitors or something. The strategic variety doesn't stop there, but apparently we're also going to gain new terrain. We're going to have nebulas that just block out sensors, so you won't know what's in there. We've seen a screenshot of neutron stars that actually nullify shields, and that's going to be something that also increases our tactical variety a lot. Like, you really got to think where you make your final stand, where you build your stations. If you're specializing for shields, then maybe don't fight in a system like that. If you're more the armor oriented race, then do that. I mean, obviously, having better ship design options, more ship design options, real specialization options is going to make this even better. But even on its own, this is a really good change. And since in the late game, we seem to get all the variety back with the gateways, with the artificial gateways, which I think are a really great idea, and the wormholes, and then those jump drives too. We're not really losing any sort of variety, we're just gaining a bit of a meaningful progression in that regard. Having that terrain and having that different strategic terrain should also make the map more easily readable. Since you're going to see where the hyperlanes are going, you will know exactly where you're going to engage the enemy, where you need to go to fight their fleet, which positions to defend. And it should make the game more easily understandable for new players as well, since you only have one form of FTL travel. So that's definitely something that's good. Easier readable maps. Very much something that I want. Now, if we could only get also fleet icons that scale with fleet size. What I've seen in the new pictures is, though, that we can now discern which of the civilian ships are science ships and which of them are construction ships by the symbol alone, which is pretty nice. And one of the other benefits of this is that we can have hidden, secret late game areas in space, because you can wall them off rather easily, and there's only going to be one way to get into that area. So you can sort of do staged multi-level areas that you can generate and maybe just have them enterable via gateway or something else. That's pretty nice. And one of the big plus points of this should be that the development for the game should be much easier. I think that having 3 types of FTL really increases the amount that Paradox has to spend on play testing, on making sure that everything works before they roll out each patch. And it also had them boxed in for game design reasons. Just they couldn't really move forward, I think, and still adhere to the 3 types of FTL drive at the same time. So getting rid of that restriction hopefully will allow them to move on and to make some bold moves for Stellaris and really develop the game into its full potential. I'm hoping that, for example, we can maybe get some trade along those hyperlanes. I really liked how Oriental Empires does the trade, where you have sort of connected cities and each city produces something, even if it's just for domestic use. Like, even if they only have a smith in there, that's still something they can trade with another city. Even if both of them have smiths, there's still going to be some local specialties and stuff. And I would really like to see something that enlivens the Stellaris map a little bit. It doesn't really have to be a very high level of trade, but having some sort of trade in between systems would be really cool. And I am hoping that we can sort of see that flowing back and forth on those hyperlanes. That would be really cool. And then you could sort of station fleets at both of the exits of those hyperlanes, just to make sure that pirates don't get to those civilian trade ships and all that. The possibilities are really big. I'm going to be very interested to see what they do for version 2.0. Even bigger changes, I guess, than 1.9. But yeah, 1.9, the changes to FTL and the changes to the star bases and all that really feels like wrapping things up. The only other need that the game has is for better diplomacy, getting more diplomatic options, and doing away with the current war system, which they are in the process of doing. So I'm actually pretty hopeful. It's gonna be interesting to see how it affects certain mods that use the warp travel extensively, like the Star Trek New Horizons mod. Gonna have to ask those devs what they're gonna do with that. But yeah, I'm actually optimistic. Sometimes you gotta make a big jump if the chasm is broad. You won't get over that with too cautious steps. So yeah. I'm happy about it. What do you guys think? Do you think the changes are gonna improve Stellaris? Do you think they're gonna destroy it? Did you buy the game because it has warp drives? Let me know in the comments. I hope I see you in one of my other videos. I hope you found this one helpful. If you did, please leave a like. If you didn't, tell me why. And yeah, thanks for watching. Bye bye.